So the book of Leviticus, which we are in, is largely about law. Most of the verses are about what you can or cannot do, what you can or cannot eat, how you can or cannot sacrifice an animal, but there are little snippets of narrative in the book of Leviticus, and we're going to look at one of those snippets today, which we did not read in our Torah reading today. It came about 10 verses earlier, and it is the story of the sons of Aharon, Nadav and Avihu. Some people might have heard of this narrative, but we're going to look at it. We're going to see some of what our commentators say about this narrative, and then we'll be able to come to some of our own understandings. So I will require some volunteer readers. So if you see the raise hand feature in the bottom of your screen, if you're willing to read, I invite you to just raise your hand so we have a few people on deck. Awesome, thanks. So I'm going to share my screen, and cool. So we have these verses, which this top verse is the last verse of chapter 9, and then the first verse of chapter 10. We started at 10:9 this morning, but we're reading these 4 verses in English. So I see Sarah has their hand up. Would you be able to read these 4 verses?
There we go. Yeah, except I gotta try to move the little screen with the people so I can see the 4 verses. Hold on one second. Experimenting. There we go. Okay. Fire came forth from before the Holy One and consumed the burnt offering and the fat parts on the altar. And all the people saw and shouted and fell on their faces. Keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Now Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it, and they offered before God alien fire, which God had not enjoined upon them. And fire came forth from God and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of God. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Holy One meant when God said, 'Through those near to me I show myself holy,' and gain glory before all the people." And Aaron was silent.
Thank you, Sarah. So the first verse might belong a little later in the narrative, but we have this really tragic moment where our own sons, who each day give this offering, are offering alien fire. I believe the Hebrew term is ish zara, that they were not commanded to bring. And God basically, imagine like a stream of fire coming from the clouds, and then the fire that humans are offering. It was sort of like the fire stream from the clouds, got them when they were offering their human fire. So we're going to look at some commentators. I see Jeannie has her hand up, who comment first on the son's mistake and what was wrong with it, and then we'll look at sort of the meaning behind our own silence. So, Jeannie, if you'd be able to read just the first 2 of what these commentators say.
On the son's fatal mistake, from Ibn Ezra on Leviticus, put fire in it. This fire was not taken from the fire that had descended from God. It was unconsecrated fire, which God had not commanded them. Both the burning of the incense and the use of unconsecrated fire were their own idea, not a commandment. Rashbam says, and his sons, Nadab and Abihu, took. Before the fire had emanated from the Holy of Holies, each took his own pan, planning to offer incense on the golden altar, seeing that this offering precedes time-wise. They placed alien fire on these pans, something which had not been commanded by Moses to be done on this day. Even though on ordinary days the rule of the sons of Aaron will place in these pans fire on the altar was in effect, this rule did not apply to the day of inauguration. Moses had not wanted any man-made fire to be Moses had not wanted any man-made fire to be introduced into the tabernacle because he expected heavenly fire to come down. The addition of human kindled fire would have ruined the miracle.
Thanks. So this is perhaps a little confusing. It's like, so normally they'd offer this fire, but on this day they weren't told to. So Moses had an omission in his instructions, and they read into the omission like, oh, we just do the thing we always do. But their reading into the omission of instructions actually like meant their demise, unfortunately, because Moses had something else in mind, but didn't necessarily say it. Like, oh, we don't do that today. Awesome. And then, Jeannie, would you read this last one as well? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I had muted myself. Rabbi Ishmael said, "They died because they entered the sanctuary intoxicated by wine. You may know that this is so because after their death, God reminds us we should not enter when intoxicated by wine."
Yeah, so just a few verses later, there's sort of a reminder, like no one can approach the sanctuary having drunk wine. But this is sort of an after-the-fact analysis. I'm curious, we could just open it up for a few minutes. If any of these commentators feel like convincing, which feels most convincing to you, if at all? Or do you have a different understanding yourself? We could also put things in the chat. Rabbi Joe, and then Elizabeth.
Hi. So thanks. Thank you, Dave, for this. So I'm really struck by Rashbam's interpretation that Moses made a mistake. Because part of what we read, the section that I chanted a little bit later also suggests that Moses may have made another mistake, right? Mm-hmm. And it makes me think about, in a healthcare setting, it's so easy to make mistakes and so much is at stake, right? Like in this story, which is such a shocking and disturbing story. And it makes me think about how Moses maybe really needed some help. Like he needed like a surgical timeout, like he needed a checklist, he needed like a whole like safety committee. Like they were literally playing with not only fire, but holy fire. So I'm appreciating Rashbam's interpretation.
Wow, and thanks for bringing us into the healthcare context. It's not something I had thought about at all. Thanks, Rabbi Joe. Liz, and then Joel.
So in reading that portion this week, I've been thinking a lot about parenting and it's really easy to focus on God's completely over the top and unnecessary reaction.
Yeah.
But it's also like really clear how, this is not the way that I like want to be in charge of things, but how important it is to have clear instructions. But sometimes like somebody does something that you don't anticipate, right? Like that's why all these rules come after. And I don't know, it just has given me some Rahmanis for God that I don't usually have in this circumstance.
Yeah, thank you. Joel?
I think of, people like Richard Dawkins, like the new atheists, they talk about, they stereotype the God of quote unquote the Old Testament being very arbitrary. And this incident, and you have this religious enthusiasm, and perhaps Moses made a mistake or Moses didn't make a mistake, but people seem to have had good intentions. And the same thing in the Haftorah, like if you do he moves the ark, he doesn't want it to fall. You do something with the best of intentions, but disaster follows. You can't really predict what God's going to do. It's like you can't be quote unquote a chassid, have this intensity and dancing and everything, because you don't know what's going to happen, if it's going to be received well, or if it's going to lead to disaster.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Joel. Carol? Are you able to unmute?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me, as they say?
Yep.
Okay. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one that's just outraged by all of this. I mean, if there ever is an argument against a death penalty, this is it.
Right.
Here are these two guys doing what they normally do, not trying to disrespect God, not trying to disrespect their father or their uncle. But their uncle has an oopsie moment and forgets to tell them, oh, we're changing things. And the whole thing is, well, it will take away from the miracle. It's more like it takes away from the optics of the miracle, that the fire comes down instead of making your own fire. And certainly it isn't warranted. Death is not warranted. And you sort of wonder about Aaron's priorities too. Here's his two sons who are killed, just poof. And he's silent.
We're about, that's a great segue.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, you killed my sons. Why did you kill my sons? Aaron has served God.
Right.
You know, Aaron was Moses' spokesperson with the Pharaoh because Moses couldn't talk.
Yeah.
You know, and Aaron now has gotten involved in this. And, you know, his two sons have died. So I sort of wonder about the commentators who seem to me look for excuses to support this. And the whole thing about, you know, God saying, oh, well, you know, you can't go into the sanctuary drunk. It's almost like, you know, the defense counsel for the policeman in Minneapolis saying, oh, that guy had he was taking drugs. It's to me is very, very disturbing. I'm wondering, are there commentators who are shocked by this and who do criticize this, or are they just, you know, sort of being enablers?
Yeah, I think so. We're gonna look. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm fumbling.
Oh no, we're gonna turn into cats.
To our next bit, which is we're gonna just look at our own silence. I saw that Saul and Sarah had their hands up. I'm wondering, Saul, because we don't necessarily have time to weigh in on the last piece, if you'd be able to read these commentators about weighing in on what exactly this silence meant. You could just read all of them.
So Ramban says that this means that he had cried aloud, but then he became silent. And Rashbam says he desisted from his mourning, did not weep, and did not perform rites of the mourning. And Abarbanel says it was as if his heart turned into lifeless stone, and so he did not raise his voice in tears and lament like a parent mourning his children, nor did he accept Moses' consolation, for his breath left him and he was speechless.
Thank you, Saul. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I think something that Carol said, I shared, Carol, your frustration as I was reading these commentators, because I was like, this is a horrible tragedy. And we're trying to sort of intellectualize it away. But what I'm stuck with is our own silence. And so we just only have about a couple minutes left. And with that time, I'm just going to share a closing poem. I invite people who didn't get to share their thoughts to put them in the chat. I wrote a poem about these two words in the Torah, Vayidom Aharon, and Aaron was silent. And then I invite us we'll honor Aaron's silence in a moment. So I wrote, Aaron's grief never ceased that day. It just came back anew, each day different, but touching the pain, the truth of their sudden death. Vatetze eish milifnei Adonai v'tochal otam, and God's fire came out and consumed them. the smell of burnt flesh. A father should never have to bury his sons, the congregation told him. And yet, he still heard whispers throughout the camp that dampened his heart. They didn't have enough emunah. They didn't have faith, those boys. They didn't listen to Moshe. Chutzpanim, those two. I always knew this role was too much for them. But Aharon knew in his heart that his boys were not commanded, not meant to offer that day. There was a mistake in the relay of information, a game of telephone with fatal fire from above. So I invite us just to sit with Aharon's silence for just a moment of silence. I invite us to close our eyes if you feel comfortable. Yahaina, 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 May the memories of Nadab and Abihu be a blessing, and may our comfort silence, or may our silence comfort maybe Aaron's grief a little bit. Thanks for looking at this, everyone, and for your thoughts in the chat and in voice. It's really a pleasure to learn with you.